Hello, everyone. We're going to go through accumulating positive emotions in the long term today. So I'm going to direct us to handout 17, Emotion Regulation Handout 17. And I just want to introduce these 7 steps to all of us quite briefly so that we can go through them together tomorrow as well. So we had talked with Tiffany last week about accumulating positive emotions in the short term. And now today we're focusing on the long term, or what we can do to build our life worth living. These are steps that we take to help us really get toward this values-oriented life worth living that we've talked about in individual therapy, and we'll cover a bit more throughout our group sessions. So the basic premise behind this is that we're making these changes in our life so that positive events will occur in the future. And sometimes that can be really difficult. I think that that is important to acknowledge, especially when there has been pain in our past and when it feels as if that pain has gotten in the way of either being able to pursue some of our values, or due to past trauma or other events of various different kinds, that like revisiting these pieces can be hard at times. So going through these 7 steps can be in service of a long-term goal, and that there can be some pieces of shorter-term discomfort that are associated with it. To that end, step 1 says to stop avoiding. So what does that mean? It means that now's the time, and that to start living the life that we want to be living, it needs to happen now. So avoiding, I really just say in my mind, is to stop it and take life. What is that saying? To grab the bull by its horns, but really to take where we're at in that moment. As where we're at and to start. So we have to stop avoiding. Step 2 is really where the action starts, and it is in identifying values that are important to you. What is really important in my life right now? Some that they list are to be productive, to be part of a group, to treat others well, to be physically fit is listed here. I'll note that it's good to do a check-in, and that we in this group have the added benefit of being able to check in with our individual therapists to see, are these values something that, like, why are they important? Do they reflect, when I read Be Physically Fit, it's always one that I do a double check with to see, what is that grounded in, and to ensure that we're being realistic about that and not, necessarily thinking about like an body image related thing that all of us women can be exposed to. What is the value really grounded in? But identifying the values that are important to you are step 1. And many of you, if not all of you, have done that in thinking about your life worth living at the beginning of DBT. Values are different than goals, and I'll make that point as we get to latter steps again. But values are this moral compass almost, right? That we are moving towards and aren't necessarily attainable, whereas goals can be a very specifically attainable thing. So just something to bookmark as we think about values, because the next step, step 3, is to identify one value to work on now. What is really important to me right now in this moment to work on in my life? Maybe that is be productive. And then in step 4, to identify a few goals related to this value. What specific goals can I work on that will make this value a part of my life? So when I think about this step, what I think about is like, how do I define this, right? How do I make an operational definition, sometimes we call in science class, that goes alongside the value that I have? The goal is what helps us know what actual steps, what micro behaviors or behaviors we're going to get engaged in to get ourselves closer to that value. So here, in the step 4 of making this specific goal of getting a job where I can do something useful, that's part of being productive, or being more active and keeping up with important tasks at home. That's part of being productive. That finding a volunteer job that will use a skill set that I already have. That's like making the value more operational, what the goals are that are associated with it. And then step 5 is drilling down even more. I think of all this as a funnel where we like are starting out big picture and we know that we want to stop avoiding now. And as we drill down, we're getting down to a few goals. And now step 5 is choosing one goal to work on right now. You can do a pros and cons list to see which goal you might want to work on. It's important to I think about goals in that SMART framework of which, when I'm starting, which ones are, attainable, SMART being the acronym, right? Measurable, etc. And step 6 speaks to that. Identify a small action step towards your goal because the S in SMART stands for small, right? What's the smallest piece that we can get started on right now that will help us build momentum? And I think that's the critical piece here. A smaller thing is easier to do than a huge thing. It helps us to build momentum from getting started and just like a snowball going down the hill, starting to pick up some speed and really, get larger as it goes down. But that is really the place to start, is like the smallest actionable unit. And the examples listed here are visiting places to look for job openings, submitting applications. These are all different examples. I would argue that there are several different small steps. So picking one. And then I think that getting really specific with it, which actually might be what the S stands for in SMART, now that I come to think of it, thinking about the most specific small action step is really important. So in going down to step 7, the last piece here of taking one action step now, I think knowing when you would do that and what that step would look like. Is it time delimited? The example they give here is going on the internet and checking for jobs in my area. Great. I would further amend that by saying, I'm going to sit down at 7 p.m., open my internet browser, give myself 15 minutes to look at jobs in this area. And once you have a discrete time period, I think that can really help with us not avoiding. It helps in stopping the avoidance, right? Because you know exactly how long you'll be spending, you know when it will be, you know that it'll be over. And we can often I think about the emotion that I think I'll experience beforehand, especially if it's some anxious avoidance that can low key happen or high key, depending. And then after I engage in that small step, I often rate the emotion afterward. Like, oh, I thought that this would be on a scale of 1 to 10, like super cruddy, a 9. And after I did it, I find that it's actually a 3. And I feel a lot better. And getting started can be the hardest part oftentimes. So that's why we drill down on what's the most specific small step that we can take now. So in summary, I think some questions to consider, let me move myself out of this frame, are what makes it hard to start? What are the values that are really important to you personally? I would say think of your top 3. And sometimes values change over time. So after motherhood is often a time that can cause us to reevaluate what is important to us. And just thinking about those top 3 things that are most important to us, I think can really help reorient. And doing that check-in from time to time, I think is important too. That's why we think of this life worth living as a living document itself that is ever evolving and changing as we change. And then how can you recognize or affirm the action steps that you're taking? I think it can be important to recognize or reward oneself or do some self-affirmation around those steps that we are taking. And so I just bookmarked that to ask how we make that recognition real. So those are just some things to think about, and I look forward to speaking with you all in group about this a bit more tomorrow. Okay, bye. I'm gonna stop recording. Let's see how.